Every single moment of every day, you're breathing. It's totally automatic. But have you ever actually stopped to think about what's going on inside your chest? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain and unlock the secrets hidden in every single breath you take.
So let's just start with a really simple question. How much air can your lungs really hold? I mean, are we talking about the amount in a water bottle, maybe a big 2-liter soda bottle, or even more? It's kind of wild to think about, right? And we are absolutely going to find out.
Okay, so here's how we're going to figure this out. The whole key to understanding your lungs is to break it down into 4 fundamental building blocks. Seriously, think of them like Lego blocks that we can click together in all these different ways to get the full picture.
All right, so let's start with those basic building blocks themselves. In the world of medicine, these are called the lung volumes. And just like I said, think of each one as a single individual Lego brick, a distinct, separate measurement of air. So our very first building block, well, you're actually using it right now. It's called your tidal volume. Go ahead, just take a normal, easy breath in and out. That amount of air you just moved, boom, that's your tidal volume. It's what you use for just sitting around, living your life. And just how much air is that? Well, on average, it's about 500 milliliters. That's half a liter, which is basically a standard-sized water bottle. So just imagine that, a water bottle's worth of air moving in and out with every single quiet breath you take.
Okay, but here's where it gets really cool, what your lungs could be doing. So after you take that normal breath in, imagine you suddenly need to take a massive, deep gasp of air. All that extra air you can suck in, that is your inspiratory reserve volume. It's your emergency deep breath tank.
And this reserve, it's huge. We're talking about 3,000 milliliters, or 3 whole liters. That is 6 times your normal breath. This is the power you tap into when you're running for a bus or really belting out a song in the car. It's crucial.
And of course, there's an opposite to that. After you let out a normal, quiet breath, there's still a bunch of air you can force out. Like when you're trying to blow out every single candle on a birthday cake. That extra puff of air you're pushing out, that's your expiratory reserve volume.
And that reserve for pushing air out is usually around 1,100 milliliters. It's what gives you the power to cough and keep your airways clear. Super important stuff. All right, this brings us to our 4th and final Lego block. And honestly, it's a bit of a weird one. I want you to imagine you push out every last bit of air you possibly can. Guess what? There is still air left in your lungs. It's called the residual volume. And thank goodness for it, because it's the only thing that keeps your lungs from collapsing in on themselves. So this 1,200 milliliters of air is absolutely critical. It stops your lungs from turning into flat little pancakes, and it means that gas exchange can keep happening even between breaths. But here's the catch, and this is a big one. Because this air never leaves your lungs, you can't measure it with a simple breathing test. It's the air that always stays behind. Okay, so now we have our 4 fundamental building blocks, right? Our 4 volumes. Now the fun begins. We can start stacking them together. And when we combine 2 or more of these volumes, we get what are called lung capacities. You can think of these like recipes that we make from our volume ingredients. First up, we have the inspiratory capacity. And the recipe is super simple. We just take your normal breath, the tidal volume, and add it to that huge deep breath reserve, the inspiratory reserve volume. Put them together, and that tells you the absolute maximum amount of air you can breathe in from a normal resting point. And you can see exactly how this works. We just stack that little 500 milliliter block for tidal volume right on top of that big 3,000 milliliter block for the inspiratory reserve. Add them up, and you get a total inspiratory capacity of 3,500 milliliters. Simple as that. All right, let's move on to the next one, and this one is a really important measurement. It's called vital capacity. Basically, this is the total amount of usable air that you can actually move in and out. It's everything except that leftover residual volume we talked about. Doctors look at this number all the time to gauge your overall lung strength. So, to get our vital capacity, we just stack up all 3 of our movable air blocks, that big reserve for breathing in, our normal everyday breath, and the reserve for breathing out. When you add all that up, you get a total usable air capacity of about 4,600 milliliters. And at last, we've arrived at the big one, the answer to that question we asked at the very beginning, total lung capacity. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's every single one of our 4 building blocks stacked together. This is every last drop of air your lungs can possibly hold, the whole shebang. And here you have it, the whole picture.
We take all that air we can move, our vital capacity, and we add that final unmovable Lego block, the residual volume. And that gives us our answer, a total lung capacity of around 5,800 milliliters. That's almost 6 liters of air, way more than a 2-liter soda bottle.
So these numbers are pretty amazing to think about, but how do doctors actually measure them? Well, in a doctor's office or hospital, they have a specific tool they use to really see how well a person's lungs are working. So that main tool is called a spirometer. You just breathe into this tube and it measures all the air you can move in and out. So it can totally measure your tidal volume, both of your reserves, and of course your total vital capacity. But what can it measure? Remember? The residual volume, that air that's always stuck inside. And because of that one little fact, it also can't directly measure anything that includes the residual volume, like, as you can see here, your total lung capacity.
And this brings us to the big payoff. Why on earth does any of this matter? Well, it's because these measurements and the patterns they make when you put them all together are basically a secret code, a language that tells doctors a story about the health of your lungs. Think of this as the ultimate cheat sheet for decoding that story. It shows 2 big categories of lung disease. Over on the left, you've got obstructive diseases like COPD. The big problem there is getting air out, so air gets trapped inside. This makes the residual volume go way up, and sometimes the total lung capacity goes up too. The lungs are basically overinflated. Now on the right, you've got restrictive diseases like fibrosis. Here, the lungs are stiff and can't expand properly. And you see the total opposite happen. Pretty much all the volumes and capacities go down. It's just an amazing example of how these numbers tell 2 completely different stories.
So if you take away one thing, let it be this. These volumes and capacities aren't just a bunch of numbers in a textbook. They are a narrative. The patterns in your breath literally tell a detailed story about what's going on inside your body.
You know, from that quiet, tiny breath you're taking right now to the massive total capacity you almost never think about, your breath is this constant, real-time indicator of your health. It's a story that's being written every single second. So, what is yours saying today?